All right. Hey there, everyone, and welcome to another episode where we're going to continue our series on intrusive thoughts. And so in this episode, we're going to talk about, again, a specific subset of intrusive thoughts that fall under the religious category. Oftentimes, this is referred to as scrupulosity OCD or religious intrusive thoughts, and you can call them whatever you want. But in this episode today, we're going to talk about how to treat them, right, or how to overcome them, right. And so, this could be for other therapists that are working with someone, or if this is something that you deal with. This is really about the path you need to take to overcome these intrusive thoughts. And so, first and foremost, this is the fourth part of this series. So if you haven't, seen the other parts of the series where I talk about specific intrusive thoughts like, blasphemous thoughts or, and all that, I'll link down in below to, show so you can check those out before this video. Because in this video, I kind of want to tie this all together of what I've talked about in the past few episodes. So when we're talking about looking at the problem of religious intrusive thoughts, the thing that we need to first and foremost do is identify the correct problem. And the first thing is understanding that it's not a religious problem, right? Because, with OCD and anxiety, it loves to mask itself as something else, right? And so we think that it's a contamination problem or an AIDS problem or a sexuality problem, a hit and run problem, right? And whatever the problem that OCD and anxiety is saying it is, it's not that, right? The problem is of OCD and anxiety. Once we understand what the problem is, then we need to take the correct action for that problem, right? So, and one of the analogies I like to use in order to kind of just paint a picture is the idea of like, okay, well, let's pretend that you had a problem with your car or your automobile, so to speak, right? Whatever car you drive, right? And, if you had a radiator problem and you took it to a shop that specializes in radiators, right? And you show up and you're like, well, you don't understand. This is a silver car, right? And so, this is the radiator problem, but it's a silver car, right? And, or if it's a truck or if it's a Range Rover or whatever, right? It's a certain model of a car. And then you keep telling the person that, they're just going to look at you like, okay, it's fine, because they know that they're just going to fix the radiator, right? And that's what they specialize in. And in the same light, that's what happens with anxiety and OCD is people say, well, you don't understand because these are religious intrusive thoughts, right? Or these are sexual intrusive thoughts or, whatever, right? And they get so focused on the outer part, right? Whatever, like the color of the car, so to speak. And, so many times people will come into my office and they'll be talking to me and it's like, well, you don't understand because I'm having this type of thought. And I'm just like, okay, like we use the same method. Because again, it's not the content of the thought doesn't matter, right? And that's really, and because it's such a sensitive subject usually that people get lost in the idea of what the content is. So assuming that the content is the problem, again, will just lead you on a very, very bad path because it's a path that I went on, right? As I shared my story a little bit in a past episode where, I was going to the churches trying to get help, right? And the thing was is someone finally was like, hey, this is OCD, right? And that's what set me kind of on my path to recovery from OCD is first I had to accept and acknowledge that this was an OCD issue first, right? And so that idea of that car radiator analogy is something that I often use with clients because it's realizing that, hey, look, this is an OCD problem and just leaving it at that. And so if you're struggling with religious intrusive thoughts or blasphemous thoughts or intrusive concerns about, I don't know. I mean, it could be anything, right? Whether or not God exists, the morality, like these big existential questions, or whether or not you're going to go to hell, whether you're going to get possessed, right? It takes on so many forms, and oftentimes they'll overlap, and you'll worry about one thing and then bounce around, right? That's what OCD does. And so realizing that whatever OCD is generating is not the actual issue. The fact that it's generating stuff and that you're listening to it is the problem, right? And the more and more we try to fight it, the more and more we try to resist it, the worse and worse it gets. And so when we look at this as an OCD issue, then the solution is very, very straightforward, right? And it's the idea of not doing compulsions, right? And that's, if I had to summarize OCD treatment in just one sentence, it's that it's compulsion elimination. Right. And that's why, the treatment model of exposure and response prevention has proved the most effective treatment for intrusive thoughts, any form of OCD, and in most cases of anxiety. Right. It's the idea of being able to diffuse the thought by experiencing the thought, experiencing the feelings, and then preventing yourself from doing any of the compulsive behaviors, right? And so that's where the identifying the compulsions is so crucial, right? And really understanding what your compulsions are, whether it's avoiding certain things that trigger those thoughts, whether it's, getting reassurance from certain people, like, oh, are you sure that this, or, if you're going and asking the same questions again and again and again and again, that's reassurance, right? And it's also checking, and then any mental rituals, thought suppression, thought replacement, counting, silently praying, right? And so when we talk about, treating OCD or treating any kind of intrusive thoughts, and that's what we're really talking about in these series is these religious thoughts, people often, they get lost in this idea between faith and OCD, right? And they try to sit there and analyze to the T which one is this, which one's that, and they get stuck, and that actually prevents them from getting better in many ways. And so, I was just working with a client recently on these kind of thoughts, and we had this discussion, and I was like, look, and so I'll just share my own personal story. Is like I eventually, after dealing with these for years, right, on my journey, because again, I didn't know what OCD was. I didn't know about this kind of treatment, right? So, part of why I share this and stuff is to hopefully, for those of you that are struggling, is to kind of help get you on the right path, because it took me a long time to find that right path. And, but what people do is they get so caught up in that minutia. And then eventually I just had to ask myself, like, look, like, okay, assuming that you have faith in God, right? Because again, with scrupulosity, it's often that mix of faith. It's asking yourself the question, like, look, do you think God wants you to sit and suffer and worry like for the rest of your life? And that's how he actually desires you to spend your life. And so, and because again, it's a question of the kind of like what you believe about God ultimately, right? It is what it comes down to. Because if you believe that he wants you to suffer and all this, well then, okay, you can continue on that path. But again, at least from my own beliefs, that's just not something I believe. And that was something where I realized, like, look, I don't think this is how God wants me to spend my life, just worrying and worrying and worrying and worrying and worrying and worrying, right? And so once I realized that it was a worry problem and not a God problem, then I really invested in and went all in the treatment. And ultimately that's how I get better. And it's not something that I deal with. And that's when I see people get better with this, when I'm working with them, the common thread is that separation between, hey, look, this is not a faith problem or a God problem. This is an OCD problem. And then a true, analysis of, hey, look, these are all the compulsions I do, removing them, allowing for that habituation to take place, right? Allowing for those emotions to drop. So whether it's writing out the thought again and again and again with a written exposure, or writing narratives, doing certain in vivo in-person exposures, right? And then literally complete compulsion removal. What happens is you're ultimately retraining your brain on the fact that these thoughts aren't dangerous. They aren't something that you need to react to, right? That rewiring process takes place through neuroplasticity, right? And you really can heal your mind and heal your brain when it comes to this with intrusive thoughts. And it doesn't matter the type of intrusive thoughts, right? So that's the thing. Just don't get caught up on the type. Realize that this, if it's a radiator problem in the car, it doesn't matter if it's a yellow car, a truck, or, whatever kind of car, right? If the radiator's the problem, that's what needs to be fixed. And then once you fix that, then it works, right? And it's the same process when it comes to, dealing and overcoming and treating with these intrusive thoughts. And so regardless on the content of the thought themselves. And so, OCD and anxiety loves to tell you that these thoughts are going to be harder than this and that, but it's just not the case, And so if these are the ones, if you're struggling with these, this is the treatment, and this is how you overcome them. And so again, if you found this video or this series helpful, we really appreciate your support by liking, commenting, and subscribing. And again, on all our social channels, we really appreciate it, and we have links down below. Also, we have some free resources available for you if you're struggling, and you'll just see it right down in the link below in the notes, where we have, different guides. We also have compulsion inventories, assessments, things like that. to help get you started on your journey. And again, we also have our, private communities and stuff. If you're interested in that, you can check out our site as well. And again, we just thank you for tuning in with us and for all your support. And we really do hope this is helpful and that you're finding success on your journey. And that's why we do what we do. So again, just thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next week as we continue our series, and we're going to be talking about harmful obsessions. So thank you so much and have a great week.